like overall, when I hear your method, I mean, what strikes me is just that it's kind of like a weird order of priorities because you're spending a lot of time like making mnemonics so that and making these kanji cards so that you can properly learn a kanji, right?
Yeah.
And you've been learning Japanese for a while, but I would guess, based off from some things that you said, that if I just handed you a Japanese novel, you're not really at the point where you could just read it naturally and easily without a dictionary.
Um,
Kind of sounds
a
like.
novel, no. But like a manga, probably. I'm reading a manga right now. I do need a dictionary sometimes, but it is like for very obscure words. Other than that, I can read it by myself. But
Yeah,
that
but I mean,
doesn't
like,
apply to any manga, of course.
yeah, like I'm talking about how, for me, by the time I was like 2 years into learning Japanese, I could read novels in Japanese and they would feel similar to how it felt to read novels in English. Like, there were
Really?
still words I didn't know. Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about trying to achieve on my channel. And of course, I was dedicating a huge amount of time each day, making a lot of flashcards and spending multiple hours reading Japanese. But I was able to get to the point. And by the time I was at that point, when I looked at my Anki deck, I got an add-on that says how many different kanji exist in your Anki deck. I had over 3,000 kanji. So I found that you have to be able to read at least 3,000 kanji to truly be able to read a novel, right? Like, of course, newspapers don't only use the Joyo kanji, that's only 2,000.
Yeah.
But a lot of kanji that are not Joyo kanji do show up in video games, manga, especially novels and things like that.
Yeah.
And so, like, for example, you told me, like, before we started recording, you were talking about the kanji for mura, right?
Yeah.
And you said that you have never come across a word that uses that right component of
Yes.
measurement.
Yes.
But that kind of gave away your comfort with Japanese to me because, like, I know a lot of words that use that, and I feel like I see them quite regularly.
Well, yeah,
So,
I'm nowhere near fluent in Japanese yet. Like, I guess I'm conversationally fluent. Like, I have no difficulty just talking to people, but reading and listening comprehension is a lot more of a difficulty for me. I wanted to ask you something.
well, basically, just the thought just to finish my thought, I was going to say. So
Oh, yeah.
it kind of seems like, for me, if you're viewing the big picture of, and of course, everyone has different goals and different paths, but just from like my point of view, because I specialize in people who really want to get to that point where they can
Yeah,
comfortably read
I'm one of those
Japanese
people.
as if it was their native language.
Yeah.
So if that is your final goal, it seems like the most efficient path is to just only focus on actually being able to read until you achieve that, and then learn how to write. Because if you can read very fluently, like I'm talking about, then learning how to write is so easy. Yet right now you're saying that you're taking time to try to learn the characters as you go. You've worked your way up to like 1,300 or whatever.
Yeah.
Where I would say all the time that you've spent making those kanji cards, you could have just spent learning more words and actually spent more time just reading actual Japanese and getting more comfortable with actual just reading fluency. And then later you can go back and learn how to write them real quickly. So I don't really see the point of like stopping and making these kanji cards where you are just having 2 cards for each kanji that you rep out of context. I don't really see that as an efficient thing to be doing before you've, before
Well,
you can just read at a
they're
high level.
they're not really out of context. They're still, whenever I'm going through through my kanji deck, I'm still thinking about the actual words using the kanji. And if I can't remember the words that use all of the meanings and readings that I need to know, then I'll go and look up the words. So,
Well, I mean, you're thinking about that, but they're still out of context because if they were in context, for example, like when you think about it, in real life, what do you actually do with kanji? Only 2 things that you do with kanji in real life, right? You
Yeah.
either read sentences
Yeah.
or you write sentences.
yeah.
You pretty much never, unless you're on like a quiz show or you're taking a test, you don't really have to just write one kanji out of context or be shown one kanji and recall how it's read or what it means or anything like that. And so if it was in context, that would mean that either you're just reading sentences, right? And you have a sentence, you're just reading the sentence. You're not thinking, oh, this one kanji, what meanings does it have? What readings does it have? Because in context, kanji don't exist in isolation. They only exist in the context of a word.
Actually, now that you say that, I kind of realized where the precise mistake with my method was, which was that I should have been writing down like into my kanji deck, I should have been writing down the words themselves instead of the like ripping out the meanings and readings, because I was still basically doing what you're saying. I would if I forgot like a single meaning or reading, I would have to go back and look up all of the words that contain the kanji and see the kanji in context, right? So I was kind of just doing that anyways, but in a very roundabout way, which I kind of realized from talking to you. So I'm probably going to restructure at least a little bit my kanji deck, and I should probably
because in real life, right, you only have to be able to write words, and so just
and
like
read
I think
words.
that if yeah, and so do you use Anki as your SRS?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the way I think about Anki is that your goal with Anki should be to practice how you play, is what I call it, which basically means that you want your Anki cards to replicate real life, and that's going to get you the most benefit. And so in real life, what are you doing? Well, you're reading sentences, you're writing sentences, or at least you're reading and understanding words. And so make your flashcards have sentences on the front and test yourself on your ability to understand full sentences.
Oh yeah,
and
I have
with writing, it can take a long time.
Cards as well.
So yeah, but I'm saying that should cover all your kanji needs as well, because that is the only time you need to use kanji is when you're reading and writing sentences. With sentences, you don't want to probably make cards where you have to write out whole sentences because that would just take too long to rep. But I would say, yeah, words. If I was gonna do kanji practice in the SRS in Anki, I would have words that I'd have to write, and then practice writing that out. But like I'm saying, like I would say that what I would recommend to someone who's like at your point where you're at a pretty high intermediate level, sounds like there's a lot of stuff that you can read comfortably. There's a lot of stuff that you can't read comfortably yet. That I would say instead of spending time practicing writing kanji, spend that time improving your ability to read kanji. Because you got to have priorities, right? Because like think about hypothetically, who would be better off in a hypothetical scenario? Someone who's in like your situation, which is you can understand a lot of written Japanese, but there's a lot that you can't understand. But for what you can understand, you can write it as well. Or someone who they can't write any kanji, they can't write a single kanji out by hand, but they can read as well as a native speaker. Who would be better off? And if you really think about that, the person who can't write a single kanji but can read like a native speaker is much better off, because you almost never have to write kanji in real life.
Yeah.
Right? Like even if you were a Japanese person in Japan, you probably hardly ever write kanji out by hand because you type. Yeah. And you don't need to be able to write kanji to type, because you just type in like,
That's also like, kind of reading skill, because you're literally exactly. You're just reading off the keyboard, because it gives you predictions.
It's like the same as speaking pretty much, right? Yeah, and reading, because you type it in and then you press spacebar and then you read it. Oh, is this the right word or not, right?
Yeah.
And so if you can read, you're going to be able to type Japanese as well. Yeah. And there's almost no situation where you need to write it out. Like even if you had to like write paperwork at a Japanese office, then you could just, if you couldn't remember a kanji, you can just look it up on your phone and then copy it out. And Japanese people do that now. Like even Japanese people themselves are getting worse and worse at writing kanji because you practice it less, right? Everyone's always on their phone, on their computer typing. And so I would just say that it seems like, from my point of view, if your final goal is to reach like a very comfortable level of Japanese reading fluency, your priorities are kind of in a weird order, because you're taking time away from practicing building up reading abilities to build up writing abilities, when you could put that off. And then if you did put that off, and you put all your efforts into learning how to read fluently, then when you do learn how to write, it's going to be much quicker. So the total time to get to the final goal of being able to read and write like a native speaker will take less time if you put off writing and focus all your energy on reading. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that honestly makes a lot of sense to me. I think maybe the only place we would disagree in is the actual order of the kanji, because I still think it's better to learn the kanji based on the frequency and the actual like usefulness when it comes to reading.
So you mean you're talking about when I'm talking about the very first initial like 1,000 kanji?
Yeah. So I would never learn like axe before learning the kanji for new, or learn the kanji for measurement before learning the kanji for village. Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, right, in my model, there's basically 3 stages, right? Stage 1 is you're learning kanji out of context, just trying to get a grasp on get a feel for kanji so they're not scribbles anymore, right? That's phase 1.
Yeah.
Phase 2 is you're learning how to just read Japanese words and sentences, and you're not really viewing kanji as isolated components. Then stage 3 is you're already fluent in reading Japanese, and then you're just building the writing skill.
Yeah.
So you're talking about my stage 1, basically, right? Is like when you're actually just learning kanji. So in my model, like what I did, right? I said I'm taking the most 1,000 common kanji, and then you learn them in an order that's separate. That's basically the order that makes them easiest to learn. But it's only the 1,000 most common kanji. So for like the one for measurement or for axe isn't in there because it's not in the 1,000 most common kanji.
Yeah,
so
but isn't it? It's not going to be in the order of the actual most common, right? So the first.
Well, it's not, but because there's only 1,000, and because you can go through them so quickly, because we're having such a low standard, it's only going to take you a few weeks to get through all of them anyway. So you might as well learn them in the order that makes them as easy to learn as possible.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess that makes sense, but it's just hard for me to say anything about that because I studied kanji in a very different way, and it seems like with this method, it's almost like an alphabet. Like you get it out of the way right off the get-go, right?
You could say that. To a very low standard.
I don't know. It took, I think I learned my 1,000th kanji like close to the end of last year. No, in the middle of last year. So that was 2.5 years into my progress with Japanese. And of course, like by that point, I already knew like a few thousand words. I think I might have been at like 3,500 maybe back then. Like I had very different priorities. I think especially at the 2-year mark, I had a very clear like imbalance of my speaking abilities and my reading and writing abilities. I just had a lot of difficulty with reading and writing, whereas I had no problem having a conversation with someone in Japanese. So I definitely had a big imbalance, and we're only talking about kanji here, but I think in the big picture, I still wouldn't be that far behind, maybe. I wanted to ask you about something you mentioned earlier. You said you were able to read novels when you were 2 years into studying Japanese. Does that mean you were able to read them without using a dictionary?
Yeah. And of course, there were words I didn't know every few pages, but there's words I don't know even when I read an English novel, right? I don't know literally every word.
Yeah. But
I was quite comfortable to the point where, I could easily read a novel with no dictionary and understand it. It wasn't like, oh, I'm practicing Japanese. It was like, oh, I'm just reading a novel and it happens to be in Japanese.
Yeah. How many words would you say you knew, at least roughly?
Yeah, but by that point, probably around 15,000, 20,000.
Whoa! I've been really, like, slacking off. I don't know. Well, I don't know where I went wrong.
I would make like 10 sentence cards, 10 to 15 sentence cards every single day.
Yeah.
And Anki, and I would always do my reps every day. Yeah, so that would have been like just in Anki, after 2 years, like over 7,000. And then I was also just picking up lots of stuff because I was like listening to Japanese as much as I could. I would spend a few hours just watching TV shows in Japanese, and then I would spend an hour or two reading Japanese, and I'd look stuff up while I went. So then I picked up a lot of stuff just naturally that way outside of Anki as well.
Yeah, I did,
and so
like a bit of immersion myself, but it was not like hours every day. It was a fair bit less. I don't know. I'm honestly quite impressed with your progress. How much have you been, how long have you been studying for, like, up until now?
Well, since I first really got serious about studying Japanese, it's been like over 7 years, like maybe 8 years, but It was really a 5-year period where I was really dedicated, and then the last few years have been more like kind of coasting.
Like, I can see myself as being fluent in Japanese, or at least by my definition of fluent. Everyone has their own definition of the word fluent. I see myself as being fluent in Japanese maybe like at the 5-year mark, but I am quite impressed with what you're telling me, like where you were at the 2-year mark.
Because, a lot of it is all about just how many hours you put in, right?
Yeah,
like
I know.
For my first 2 years, that was pretty much my whole life. I was just doing Japanese stuff for most of my day. I would avoid English. I never watched a movie in English, never read anything in English. I would try to just keep myself to only doing Japanese stuff as much as I could.
Yeah.
And also I had my philosophy was input before output. So I didn't spend really that much time trying to speak or trying to write. I just focused on understanding. And so I would spend all my time like just reading and trying to understand, listening and trying to understand. And in the beginning, I actually put a lot more emphasis on reading than listening, because I figured that it was easier to grow your vocabulary through reading, and then I could just have my listening ability catch up kind of later. And so reading was my really main focus. And so I would try to read around a novel a week or a novel every other week. Every novel I'd notice a big difference in how easy it was to read, how much I could understand, how many unknown words there were. Yeah, I think that emphasis on input before output was really helpful, because by the time I did actually start to practice speaking and writing, I felt it came very naturally, because I had just been so comfortable with Japanese. I had just seen so many patterns so many times. I knew what Japanese people say in certain situations. I knew, like, when I wanted to say something, I knew how Japanese people tend to express that thing, because I've heard it so many times. Like, I had a really good intuition for grammatical structures, conjugations, for like collocations, like what verbs go with what nouns. And so it kind of just came naturally. So that's why I always stress on my channel that trying to force yourself to practice speaking towards the beginning isn't really a good use of time if your goal is to reach a truly high level, because you have to have a huge foundation of input for speaking at a high level to even really be possible,
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just making it up. Otherwise, you're just practicing speaking your native language in a Japanese-like way.
I don't know. I still think it is important, but there's definitely the risk of developing bad habits. But I personally found that even those are fairly easy to get rid of with more practice, more input. So
yeah, well, when you say you think it's important, do you mean in a motivational sense or like in a developmental sense?
In a developmental sense. I don't know. I see it as almost like, I came up with this analogy at some point, that studying a language without speaking at all, and then just diving in head deep into trying to like communicate with natives is almost like learning all of the theory about doing a backflip on a motorbike and then getting on a motorbike and doing a backflip. I don't think it would be very effective. But I mean, of course, I could be wrong. I'm not as experienced as you are. But I don't know. Could you tell me about your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's pretty different than the motorbike thing, because for me, that would be like if someone said, oh, I'm just going to memorize every word and read every grammar book out there before I start reading Japanese.
Yeah.
That would be like saying, oh, I'm going to read like everything about doing a backflip before ever practicing, and then I'll just be able to do the backflip. Right? Yeah. That's definitely not going to work. But the thing is, in order to understand like native speech, let's just say, right? Like native speech, natives tend to speak at a pace of like above 2 words per second on average. It's very blurry, it's very fast. And so in order to get to the point where you can hear, like if we say Japanese, native Japanese, and you understand it almost at like 99.9% accuracy instantly, effortlessly. Like if you think about how well you understand English, right? You don't have to do anything to understand what I'm saying right now.
Yeah.
My words hit your ears, they're understood. You couldn't not understand even if you tried.
Yeah.
Right? And that's because you have so much unconscious infrastructure related to parsing and understanding and comprehending English.
Yeah.
So in order to get to the point where you can hear native speed Japanese unfiltered and you understand it at that same level, you have to have a lot of mental infrastructure, right? You have to have a lot of neural pathways in your unconscious mind, because it's an unconscious thing, right? Like right now, but by the time my words hit your consciousness, they're already have been transformed into meaning.
Yeah.
Right? You're not consciously saying, oh, this word means this and this in this grammar. It's like automatic. It's done on the level of your unconsciousness. And so to get to that point with Japanese, you basically build this huge Japanese comprehending machine in your unconscious mind. And the thing is, this machine, basically what it does is when inputted with Japanese, it outputs meaning. But what my experience is, once you have that machine up and running, you can use the same machine to go in the opposite direction to input meaning and output Japanese, right? It's like the same mechanism. It's like the same, it's the same box in the same way. And so, of course, it takes some practice to get it going. But what you're doing when you're getting fluent in understanding Japanese is you're making raw connections between meaning and language, right? So right, like when you first start learning a language, you kind of have to go through your native language, right? So if we said like boku wa neko ga suki desu, right? At the beginning, you can go, okay, boku means me, neko means cat, ski means like, okay, it means I like cats, right? But when you get to that high level of comprehension ability, where as soon as you hear that sentence, it's automatically understood. There's no English in there, right? It's just direct connection between Japanese and English.
Yeah.
And so now that this connection is made, you can actually use the same connection to when you have the thought, I like cats. It's not in English, right? It's just going to be just a thought with no form, right? Well, your brain already has connected to that the grammar and the language and everything that's necessary, right? It's like if you have one, you have the other. If that's what a connection is, right? The two things are attached. Mm-hmm. So I found that even early on, before I even tried to speak, I remember one day, like 6 months into learning Japanese, I stubbed my toe and I was like, ita. And I was like, whoa, look,
I've had that Japanese. At some point myself. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it starts, and it's a very natural process. And I think it's because the human brain is made to acquire language, right? It's different than learning how to backflip. Human brains aren't designed to learn how to backflip, but they are designed to learn how to speak human language. And that's why children, even though that they, all they can do is cry and poop their pants, are somehow still able to acquire human language so quickly to such a high level. It's because our brain's built to do that. And that's why it's different than other skills, fundamentally.
But what about, like, pronunciation and pitch accent?
Well, here's the other thing. So, if we're talking about pronunciation in general, right, I think that so for example, like I'm a native speaker of English, right? So when I hear a second language speaker of English who doesn't have a perfect accent, I can very intuitively hear where his pronunciation deviates from how I would pronounce something, right?
Yeah.
So, like, for example, if a Japanese person tries to say, like, I am Tanaka Taro, whatever, right? And I hear it's like, oh, no, you're saying this vowel wrong, this consonant wrong, right? I can intuitively hear it. So I have this kind of intuition for what it's supposed to sound like. And when it doesn't sound like that, I can immediately tell. It's like an alarm goes off in my head. And so when I'm speaking English, every once in a while, a word doesn't come out right? Maybe I just say a word funny. I immediately notice. I'm like, oops, that sounded wrong. And so then I can go back and correct it. And so through listening to Japanese for so many hours, I built up a similar intuition so that when I first started speaking Japanese, it sounded awful. It sounded bad. My tongue didn't know where to go, but I knew it sounded bad. And so I was able to get it right because I could give myself feedback, right? I knew when I was hitting the target and when I was missing it. And so just through practicing speaking, I was able to just kind of intuitively be like, oh, when I put my tongue kind of like this, it sounds right. Oh, when my tongue's like that, it sounds wrong. Or like, oh, the vowel is too open. I need it to be more tight. And so within just like a couple weeks, I was able to have pretty good pronunciation because I could tell when I was off. So I could give myself I could micro adjust my pronunciation by feeling when it was right or wrong. On the other hand, if I hadn't spent all that time immersing, then I would have been totally oblivious to whether I was pronouncing it correctly or not. Right?
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, boku wa neko ga suki da yo. I would have no idea. Right. And so in a way, that's kind of like, it would be as if I was a blind person trying to like draw a picture of my friend's face, right? It's like, I can't tell whether I'm hitting the target or not. So I'm totally just lost in the wind. And of course, a native speaker could try to give me feedback, but it's like, if you can't hear it yourself, you're not going to be able to hit the target, right? And that's why even people who lose their hearing later in life, their pronunciation starts to deviate more and more slowly over time, just because they can't give themselves the feedback. You need to be able to give yourself the feedback in order to reach the level of accuracy that you need to really sound like a native speaker. So that's why I think that, in a way, yeah, you have to practice pronunciation to get it right. But if you don't have that intuition that comes from getting all that immersion, then you really have no shot in hell.
That's actually very interesting because I've never really heard about people starting to practice speaking when they already were very familiar with the language, and I didn't even have an idea of how that works. But yeah, that's pretty interesting. Like, and what you were saying earlier about how you got to your level of Japanese. Now that I think about it, that really reminds me of the way I learned English. Because I was pretty much doing the same thing. I would just I don't consider myself to have studied English then. I was just consuming content because I enjoyed it, and I didn't have to make myself do it. It almost felt like I kind of cheated in learning English because I didn't really have to put in effort. It was just enjoyable because it was a foreign language and it was more fun than doing the same things in my native language.
Yeah, and guess what? Your English is practically perfect. It's like pretty dang close to perfect. So if I were you, I would say, okay, I don't know, for whatever I did to learn English, that fucking worked.
Yeah.
So let me try to replicate that process as close as I can to get the same type of results.
Yeah, I know pretty much exactly like what it is. It's just, it feels like an effort to like go out of my way to practice Japanese sometimes. So I just revert to consuming like English content. I started like most people. I got into Japanese from having an interest in anime, but the one that I'm watching right now is just kind of boring, so I'm going with it very slowly. And I have a manga that I'm reading, but because I still have to like every once in a while use a dictionary, it's still a little bit more of an effort. But I know for a fact that once I get to a level where I don't have to rely on the textbooks and the dictionaries anymore, it'll just almost be like a slide where I'll just be consuming more and more content because I don't need the safety net, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And by the way, what's your native language?
Oh, my native language is Russian. So, wait, did you think my native language was English?
No, I could tell that you were that you weren't a native speaker, but
yeah.
it was good enough where it wasn't immediately obvious what your native language was.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you're really close to perfect, but, like, I don't know, maybe, like, 99%. My experience with Japanese is that English right now is the most convenient language in the world, just because so much of the world population is using it.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we have incredible content with English, entertainment-wise, information-wise, like, education-wise. And so I can imagine that there's just a lot more exciting things happening in English than are happening in Russian. So I can see it kind of being effortless to just naturally be pulled towards the English kind of sphere. And that's why there's so many Europeans and people around the globe who have kind of, like you, reached a very high level in English, because there's just so much stuff happening in English. And there is a lot of cool stuff happening in Japanese. But one thing that I still struggle with is that there's just more people who speak English. There's more stuff happening in English. And so I kind of have to, even though I'm at a really comfortable level with Japanese, a lot of times I still have to go out of my way to find the Japanese thing I want to watch, or choose the Japanese thing.
Yeah.
Because if I'm just going off of raw interest and desire and engagement, then English is just unbeatable.
Yeah.
And so I still feel like, I have to make sure I clock my Japanese time and like seek out the stuff that's interesting and stuff like that. But at the same time, it doesn't really feel like studying that much. A lot of times it's like I find a good movie and so I'm just watching a movie. It just happens to be in Japanese. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that I would suggest to you is that if you kind of have this mindset, and this is something that Katsumoto from All Japanese All the Time talked about, a lot of people have this mindset of like, oh, well, right now I'm not good enough yet, so I'm doing like learner stuff. But as soon as I hit this point where I'm going to be fluent enough, oh, well, then it'll just be natural. I'll start doing Japanese stuff all the time. I'll like be on the slide.
Yeah.
And there's some truth to that, of course. But psychologically, it can be useful to try to flip that around and say, instead of, oh, I do stuff in Japanese because I'm fluent, to say, oh, no, the reason why you get fluent is because you do stuff in Japanese, right? Just like you said with English, right? That was the case, right? First, you're doing stuff in Japanese all the time, and through that, that's where the fluency comes.
Yeah.
And so try to just think of it as like, it's not, don't put that off into the future, just bring it into the now. I would also say, like, right now you say, okay, right now I'm watching a anime, and I'm rating a manga. But that's not how you consume stuff in English, is it, right? You just do whatever looks cool in the moment. So I would say, like, think about how you browse YouTube. How you're just clicking video to video, see what looks cool. You get like 5 tabs open with different videos you want to watch.
Yeah.
Like, try to consume Japanese that way, right? Put your YouTube in Japanese.
I've tried like exploring Japanese YouTube, but it's just not quite as saturated as English-speaking YouTube.
Yeah.
Or even Russian-speaking YouTube.
Yeah, no, Japanese YouTube definitely pales in comparison to English YouTube for sure.
Yeah.
But, I mean, if like maybe just, like, for example, if you have Netflix, like, do you have Netflix?
Yeah.
Do you have a VPN to use?
I could, yeah.
Because if you put on a VPN, like, so that your IP address looks like you're in Japan, then there's way more Japanese content, like 10 times more Japanese content on there. Mm-hmm. So it's like, maybe just try, like, be watching 10 shows at the same time. And then every day, just whatever show feels the most interesting right now, go and watch that. Because if you're saying, like, oh, right now I'm watching one anime, and the anime is boring, so I don't watch it, and then I never get on to the next anime because I haven't finished the one I'm watching, then, it's, like, not that good of a position.
I'll be honest with you. I'm a bit OCD about that stuff. I just want to finish it and move on. And I don't actually have that much left, so I think I might just like power through it and then move on to
No, I
stuff
mean, I'm
I
not saying
enjoy
don't.
more.
I'm not saying I'm not saying don't finish that anime, but like just maybe have more things going at once. Because if there's ever a time where you're like, oh, like, should I do Japanese? Oh, but that anime, I don't really feel like watching it right now. That's an opportunity lost because of your OCD, right? It's like, oh, well, if only you also were watching a show that you were interested in, you would have done more Japanese. But you didn't because you're watching one show and the show happens to not be good. So that's a bad situation of because you have OCD. And I also have a lot of these OCD tendencies. I've always fought with them. So I totally know where you're coming from. But if you think about it, if you're like, okay, if I had less OCD, I would be doing more Japanese right now. That's a bad situation, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Is there any Japanese show you would recommend on Netflix?
Yeah, let's see. Well,
I heard there
do you know
was-
about Terrace House?
Yeah, that I heard about that. People say that's pretty good.
Yeah, I like Terrace House. It's like a reality TV show. Also, let's see. There was this drama called Otto no Chimpo ga Hairanai. That was pretty good.
All right.
Yeah, it's about this. Yeah, like actually, it's about exactly what you'd think it would be about if you understand that title. But it's like really realistic. It's not like corny. It's like pretty
Okay.
real. It's a Netflix original drama.
Yeah, I think I'll check out Terrace House first because I've heard like multiple people talk about that at this point. Not even people that
Yeah,
are studying
and
Japanese.
Yeah, and some people love it, some people hate it. So like, what I would say is that, like, because I also have that OCD of like, if I'm halfway through a show, it kills me to drop it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like trying to like loosen those tendencies, I think is really helpful because what's the most important thing is that you're watching something in Japanese. Whether or not you like, if you like finish 5 shows or you watch half of 10 shows, that doesn't really matter from the big picture of language learning, right? You don't want to get stuck in that position where you like you're watching something you don't really like, and so then you spend less time on it. Like I've totally been there too, and I've like slowly gotten better at it over time. Like one thing I do is I'll just say, oh, I'll come back to it later. Like I'll watch it eventually. Just
Yeah.
I'll try something new right now, and then I'll never really come back to it.
Yeah.
Or maybe I will, but. Or just having multiple things at once, because sometimes you're in different moods, right? Sometimes, you're in a mood to watch something serious. Sometimes you're in the mood for something that's like more comedy related. Another recommendation I would have just in general is that don't try to find the Japanese version of what you like in English. Try to like just reinvent your tastes, because Japanese and English are so different.
Oh
where,
yeah,
like,
yeah. I don't
let's say you,
really
like-
do that.
yeah.
To be honest.
Okay, cool. Because that's just something I've heard other people do, where they're like, "Oh, I love action movies, but Japanese action movies suck." It's like, well, okay, you like English action movies, but maybe in Japanese you like romance movies. Who knows? You gotta like, they're so different where you gotta kind of reinvent your tastes in a way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. I think we definitely covered a lot of ground today. I am quite impressed with some of the things you've shared about your process of studying Japanese, and kind of made me feel a bit inferior, but also made me remember the time that I was studying English myself.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, you're the better language learner of the two, because you've mastered English and now you're learning Japanese and other languages and so on. So
Do you not speak other languages?
just Japanese and English at the. Well, I'm starting on Chinese recently, but I'm still at a pretty shitty level.
Okay. Well, I don't know. It's kind of hard for me to take compliments because I always know I can do better, and if I can do better, that means I'm not doing well enough. So these kinds of conversations definitely.
There's no time limit, right?
Yeah. These kinds of conversations
You got the rest of
definitely
your life.
motivate me, I guess, as well as many other people. I've received like comments from some viewers saying like that they started learning Japanese from watching me speak Japanese after like a certain amount of time, and now I'm experiencing that myself from talking to you. So
Yeah, well, I mean, I think to a certain degree that's like universal. Like even for me, there's like some foreigners who are on Japanese TV who like are pretty much perfect, and they can like actually participate in debates about politics and stuff, and I still feel like, oh, I'm still nowhere near like that guy's level.
yeah. There's always
I mean,
room for improvement. It's all very, very relative.
But yeah, it was really fun to talk. I also really commend you for being open-minded, because I know I said a lot of stuff that probably was like different than the way you thought about things from now, and I definitely feel like you're being open to exploring these ideas, and a lot of people aren't. So It was definitely really fun to talk.
Yeah, I certainly agree with like most of the things you've mentioned, and I'm probably going to reorganize a little bit the way I study kanji specifically. But yeah, I think we definitely covered a lot of ground today. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, anytime. My pleasure.
Hopefully we'll talk some other time.
Yeah, definitely.